Hey, it's Matt. I'm back with another transparent watercolor. This time I've got a pair of Carolina Wrens. These little guys come into our feeders a lot, and they're awfully cute, so I thought they'd make a fun painting. I got the photo reference for these guys using a 400 millimeter lens, and took pictures of them as they were coming to the feeder. I started by frisketing off all of the foreground elements. I was going to concentrate on the background first, and then I'll peel off the frisket, revealing the white of the paper. So once I had that covered, I used a 1-inch flat brush to wash in a background. I went from browns toward the front and kind of a smoky greenish color in the background. I wanted to have the maximum detail and contrast in the foreground and have things fade off as it goes back. So at this point I was just kind of putting in some of those details with a number 6 round brush, kind of faking in some leaf litter. And I built this up with many glazes of light color. I was trying to keep the amount of saturation in the colors kind of low in the background, saving a lot of those more intense saturated colors for the wrens and the branches that are going to be developed later on in the painting. But the frisket's allowing me to get all that detail and sharp edges, detail in the background while maintaining those sharp edges that I'll want when I put in the foreground elements. In the actual photos that I had, I just had 2 birds on the same perch, probably even the same bird, over a period of an hour or two of taking photos. And my background was just kind of a blurry green. I wanted to do a picture of a pair of the wrens, so I had to compose it differently. Here I'm peeling the frisket off to reveal the white of the paper. Then I started transferring over the sketches, the main lines from my sketch. And then I'll use this to transfer to the paper so I have a nice sharp sketch to work from. And I'm using, I think that's a number 4 or a number 6 H pencil that you can get a nice, really clean transfer onto the watercolor paper. So with my initial photos, I just had a bird on a little stumpy thing, and there was no real background. It was just a blurry green. And I wanted to do a painting of the 2 birds. Well, if you do a pair of 2 birds, compositionally, that can kind of be a hard thing to balance. So I wanted to bring in some other elements. So although I had a pair of birds, I had many more elements that I was going to be on the page to look at, instead of just having 2 items that you kind of look at one, look at the other, look at one, look at the other. This one I have other things to look at and move your eye around. So I composed it when I did the sketch by adding a lot of these branches. And as I added the branches, I wanted to have some diagonals that would build some energy into this. And so I'll have the tails, the tails kind of move in one direction, and we have the branches moving in the crisscross opposite of that. So it kind of moves your eye around a lot. My first goal at this point, once I had the drawing transferred, was just to cover the paper, get as much of the painting covered as I could, so I can start building my detail and tones appropriately. And I think at this point I was using a number 2 or it's a number 2 round brush. And there you can see my photo reference, that there was just kind of a flat backgrounds, which was pretty, but I thought with the composition of the 2 birds that might get kind of boring. And so I brought in those other elements. If you look at pure square inches of painting on this, the birds don't account for a lot of the painting. Most of my time was spent painting bark, peeling bark and twigs and things like that. So the birds really didn't account for all that much time. There's a lot of detail on them, but time-wise more went into the other elements on the page. since I was kind of making up all the background on this, I wanted to think about how the color was going to be playing on the page, and I chose to make kind of a lightish, cooler colored bark peeling off the main branch that goes through the middle of the painting, and leave some of the other parts that are underneath that bark with more browns and warmer tones that would go well with the Wrens. So there's a lot of thought went into just where the warm colors and saturated colors were going to be in this painting. As you look through these, there's a lot of it goes by quickly, but there's a lot of color goes into those kind of gray tones that are in the bark and in some of those muted tones of the branches, and you end up using a lot of purples and greens and blues to make it look right in the end, to make it interesting to look at. It reads as kind of a gray in the end, but when you look closely, there's a lot more color going into those. Something that I struggled a little bit on this painting with was just how far back did I want the detail to go, and where did I want it to start fading out and losing the contrast. Because I wanted it to lose detail and lose contrast as it goes back, so it focuses your eye toward the front, but I also wanted to have that be a natural transition. I wanted the birds to be crisp, and I still wanted to have the illusion of a lot of detail in the background with those little branches and things, but I wanted also to let it go so it wasn't commanding your attention in the background as much. Just to have those areas toward the top of the page just carry you back into the painting rather than, drive you off the page. And it took me a while to get that balance on this. There you can see some of the photo reference of the one Wren. And then so I work on one Wren, I work on the other, and kind of try to bring everything on the page up to an equal level of detail as I went. The hardest part of the Wrens, I think, in the end were the feet. Kind of these pinkish, purpley, gray feet that were just hard to get right. But there's an amazing amount of, for a little brown job, there's an amazing amount of detail in all these little stripy feathers and the little line through the eye, and they're a fun bird to paint, but they're actually they're kind of tough. Here I switched to a 10-aught brush, picking away at some of those smaller details. And back to the number 2 round. That was kind of the go-to brush for this painting. I'd say 90% of the foreground elements were done with the sharp number 2. And many, many layers of light glazes built up the colors to at least what I thought looked right. Oh, you guys get the side view. That means I was using the magnifier to get these little details on around the eyes and the beak and the wings. So sorry about the lousy view. Little tiny details. The feet, again, the feet took a long time on this. They're probably one of the hardest parts of the whole painting. And you can see how many bazillion layers of paint go onto one of these. It's any one area I probably go over 15, 20 times before it's done. There is putting the little black lines around the face. They have a fair amount of detail right in the cheek area there. Something I never really noticed just looking at them through binoculars, but when you have them on the page in front of you, you've got to sweat those little details. So you guys get the good view again. For the browns on the bird, I didn't use a lot of tube browns. Normally I might use like a burnt sienna and some other things like that for this. On these I used a lot of, I'd often start with a cadmium red medium and then sort of use a split complement to kind of tone that back a little bit so it wasn't fully intense. So I'd be adding a little bit of viridian or something to knock it back. And then for the darker parts, I'd use some of that same color and I'd bring in a little dioxazine purple to round it out. And in other places I'd use a little alizarin crimson. And so not a lot of tube browns for the birds. Just that's the way I ended up doing it. So kind of at this phase in the painting, I was spending a lot of time just working around, picking away at little details that didn't get finished yet, and trying to crisp up all the little ends that were a little blurry and I wanted sharp, and adjust those little aspects. So kind of icing the cake late in the painting here. There were a couple of times I thought I was done with the painting. I signed it here and then realized, I really should do a little bit more around the face. I thought that needed a little bit better definition, that it didn't pop out as much. And so I picked away at some of those other things that bothered me, and then it was actually done. So that was the painting, a pair of Carolina Wrens, a little 7x10 inch painting. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have a chance, there's more information on the blog and on the website about this painting and other paintings. So thanks for watching.